hopefully you can join us. It's also streaming live also on YouTube and also on Facebook. So it's a lot of fun. And the 4 pillars that I speak about are the same 4 pillars that I also we have on the show, which happens to be the 4 pillars of our book. So if you checked out the book or the show, you'll get a similar message. And one of the pillars that I've learned in life through this process, through this journey that I've been on, is one, to connect with, authentically, right? So as you heard me speak, I mentioned in the early stages about being learning disabled, dyslexic, picked on and bullied. I think it's so important to share some of those things because what happens is it breaks barriers down. I've had multiple calls with people or coffee meetings with people, and often people will get they'll get welled up and as they start talking about themselves. And they're like, I've told you things that I've never told anybody before. But it's because I'm vulnerable, and because I'm vulnerable, people tend to open up, right? So that's first one pillar that we speak about in the book is connecting authentically. The second pillar is being others focused, being a go-giver. I don't know if anyone's ever read the book The Go-Giver by Bob Burg. Great guy. Him and John David Mann co-authored the book. Bob Burg was actually on my show, my LinkedIn Live show, but great book, and really just taking your eyes off of yourself and putting it onto others. I learned that, unfortunately, when you're, and because I was so wounded and so broken for many years, I really was, and I had this broken heart. It's, when you're wounded, the only thing you're thinking about is self-protection. And so when I was finally be able to I got healed up, it gave me the ability now to be able to, focus on helping other people. And that became amazing. In fact, I felt more connected during the lockdown, during COVID, because I really discovered this, and it really came and sunk into me, right around that time, and I started to really be others focused. And what I've learned is when you give, you not only get, but you get. Anyone's a believer, pressed down, shaken together, overflowing, and so there's that aspect of it as well, because when you, and I talk about it in the book. It's called I call it the law, the secret of the corn, right? What happens when you plant corn seed?
It grows.
It grows, but what grows from corn seed?
Popcorn.
Well, popcorn eventually, but corn, right? Corn, right? You don't plant corn and then eventually comes apples, right? Whatever you plant, whatever you sow, you reap, right?
The seeds.
Your seeds, right?
The seeds you plant is what grows.
Is the plant you see is what grows, exactly. But what's interesting is when you plant 1 or 2 or 3 kernels of corn, not only does a stalk of corn come up, but how many kernels of corn from each of those ears of corn, right? So there's not only the law of sowing and reaping, but the law of increasing return is in play too. So when you focus on others, what? Time's up? Oh wow. Okay. So check out the book. Let me tell you real quick. The third. I think she was going to tell me what the time was before. So the third one is having the grit to overcome obstacles, and the fourth is building community. So hopefully you'll come by, say hello, check out the book. It just came out on Audible, so if you're not a reader, because I'm learning disabled, reading is hard, you could also check out the Audible book. So appreciate everyone's attention. Love you all. Be the light, and God bless.
A mic, because I can't hold books and a mic at the same time. And like my friend Mark from the Bronx, I'm from Brooklyn originally, so we grow up this way. This is what a whisper is. I'm going to talk about 2 books, basically, but I'll read more from one. This one is called A Hint of Light. It's about a half-black, half-Korean boy who's abandoned from the time he is born and has to live on the streets of Seoul with his abandoned half-white, half-Korean companion as children, as they make their way from the streets through the marketplace, through whorehouses and hotels, to Tokyo, and then to New York. I spent 3 years on research, including a year in Seoul, a year in Japan, and also, of course, New York. The origin of the book is when I was sitting in a cafe in Seoul, and I was just having a cup of coffee, and I see this young black man speaking fluent Korean to the person serving the coffee. And I thought, this gentleman must be in the service, and as I went up to listen in on the conversation, it was so fluent that I realized he was very young. And that started me in my understanding of what the streets were like. And as a writer, I very much like to walk the streets and see what's going on, and I've done this in different places around the world, and I interviewed many of these children and people who took care of them, and as a result, the book came about. So I'm going to read a little excerpt, and I believe, I just can't hold the mic with one hand and read. Oh, well, thank you very much. John wants to, I want to.
I want to reach you. Okay. Pam, you said you're holding.
It's okay.
She moved it up close for it.
Step back a little bit. I'll hold it for you.
Oh, okay, thank you. So this is from the first part of the book. It's called Gumdingy. Gumdingy is a word that if you associate it with the N-word, it is actually worse in Korean. Joe Winter's mother was a whore. She died on the broken rock and dirt gutters somewhere in the noisy, cold, wet back alleys of downtown Seoul, South Korea. In 1960, expelling him from her womb in a painful fit of spite and hate. A crowd of peddlers watched on as a mulatto baby appeared, then walked away in disgust. An old woman tied his umbilical cord with a string, slapped the baby into life, and named him Byung-suk. It was the first of many slaps to come. His father, an American soldier, had left him nameless, but indelibly marked with a touch of black. The old woman trudged on alone with him, the wind and the cold, icy, sharp slivers of gray rain beating down on her face and the baby she carried beneath her shabby overcoat until she too had to give up and pass him on to another younger woman. Byung-suk lived his life, his bleak, neglected childhood passed on from one person to another until the indifferent netherworld of the familyless claimed him as his own. By the age of 9, Byung-suk ran with the streets. Fast and lonely, his body caked with layers of an unnatural black that defied identification with anything human. He followed the years through Seoul's inhospitable marketplaces like a shadow, always present, but just beyond the hint of light. As Byung-suk traveled the damp back alleys, his stomach growled. The smell of fresh, raw fish filled his nostril, and he paused for a moment. He pressed his nose against the window of a steamy noodle shop, only to recall the slap once more as a shop owner sneaked up behind him, forcing him to move on before he was caught and turned over to the police. I will stop here with that. All of this, I'm trying to. This is fiction, but it's based upon a great deal of research, and it's very close to truth. And it's also a story in our current day and age of everybody complaining about diversity and why people shouldn't be recognized, that it should be heard. And there's a whole story about the publication of the book, which is, I can't go into at this moment, but I would like to also present to you one more book. It's called Every Day is a Gift, Surviving Cancer and Making Peace with the Past. Every day is a gift is what my father told me 40 years ago after he died the first time. And since there is nobody on this earth who's not been touched by cancer, it is relatable to just about anyone. besides writing the book, I also do workshops, writing workshops, speaking engagements, and presentations. And it's very popular because when you write something, you get it out of your system. If you read it aloud to your group, then it makes it real. It's like any other intense situation that you have to go through. And I'd like to read a little bit from the book because cancer usually comes as a surprise, and as I say in many of my engagements, you can't do this alone. It's like any other serious problem. You need support, and any support is welcome because most people don't know how to deal with it. I'm cancer-free. I had prostate cancer. And for men, it doesn't show up. But cancer for women shows up. And how you understand it, how it's told to you, how you receive it is very important. So the first chapter, the decision and my next cocktail. The thought of cancer makes you wince. It takes your breath away. It didn't hit me until I sat down in front of my computer to provide information at the local Red Cross in order to give blood. Halfway into the questions, I had been diagnosed with the early stages of prostate cancer, and the attendant paused. The pleasant smile drained from her face, and she told me that her father was in the early stages of prostate cancer too. Unfortunately, I would not be able to donate blood. I was disqualified. It had never occurred to me that I would be unfit as I entered the Red Cross storefront that morning, so I went to the lobby to wait for my wife, who was also giving blood, and sitting down, I reconsidered my life. According to a stranger, even though I was in good health and fit otherwise, perfect health had a new definition. I didn't meet the requirements. Up to that moment, although I understood the implications of prostate cancer, it did not register until someone I was meeting for the first time looked me in the eye and told me I am not the person I thought I was when I walked in, and I had to take a breath. But I was aware of cancer and its long reach. My father died from prostate cancer that, by the time he was diagnosed with it, had spread throughout his body. He was a guy who never liked to go to the doctor. So 30 years ago, before my diagnosis, I watched him go from walking to walking with a cane, to balancing himself on crutches, steadying himself with a walker, doing wheelies in a wheelchair, to a hospice, to a nursing home, to the hospital, and finally to the funeral home. That was in 1982, just shy of his 60th birthday. I'm now 76. And although medical science and technology have improved dramatically since then, my memories have remained fixed on those 2 years leading up to his death. And how it affected my... I'm sorry. Whole family then and years later. Now I have come to understand that memories build up in layers from single events to events that overlap and lead into each other, a narrative thread that colors your thoughts and informs your decisions for many years to come.
Dave.
The past helps to identify who you are compared to who you think you are. consciously or subconsciously, serious illness, especially cancer, becomes an interpretation of life because someone who dies of cancer does not pleasantly pass on.
I'm Betty Bono, and I have a book of short stories. Another one is coming out, and I also have novels about seniors that gain the ability to travel in time and use that ability to solve mysteries in the past. So yeah, I'm that person. But I'm going to read one of my short stories from my new book that's coming out, and it's set in Chicago. I grew up north of Chicago, and it's set in 1962. It's called Birdman. No one knows how Birdman got his name. He just kind of introduced himself that way when he joined up with us. He was just another kid on a bike put together with old parts like the ones we all rode, a kid with a baseball glove. He showed up at the empty lot one day, riding up, stopping but not dismounting. He knew the etiquette of the matter, stayed and watched and waited for one of us to ask if he wanted to play. One idea we had about his name was that he called himself that because of the movie, The Birdman of Alcatraz. Who wouldn't want to be Burt Lancaster, especially if you're 10 or 11 or 12 and it's 1962 and you're in Chicago, one of the tough parts of Chicago, and you don't have much, and even with a bike, no matter where you go, you're sort of locked in, so it feels kind of like a penitentiary. At least a penitentiary from a kid's understanding. Plus, when a bunch of the great-grandpas got together on the stoops, they'd talk about the calaboose. And you've known kids, some older kids, who've been rounded up by the cops. Back then, the Cook County Jail had its own electric chair, and Stateville was pretty close by, Joliet too. You should have seen the lines outside the Palace Theater the summer that Burt Lancaster picture came out. We all saw it together at the Late Show. It had to be the Late Show because that's when Louie's brother, who was an usher, was working and could let us in by opening the side door right down by the screen. We would have liked a matinee better because that's when all the kids would be there and you'd see everybody and be seeing yourself. And there'd be something dramatic about going from the light and heat of the sidewalks into a theater that wasn't just named a palace, it was a palace. Maybe you'd have some popcorn and get a good seat with all your friends, and then the lights would go down and you'd be somewhere magical for a while. For myself, I don't think Birdman took his name from Burt Lancaster. It was more likely just who he was. Like if you watched him play ball, you'd see the bird inside the kid. On that first game, when we asked him if he wanted to play, we put him in the outfield because if you don't know how a kid will do, you start him in the outfield. We saw he was going to be fine when a long fly ball was sent his way, a fly ball that, if everything we knew about fly balls and the universe held true, should have cleared the fence and boomeranged down the alley behind the grocer and Levine's tailors and dry cleaners. But somehow, Birdman was in the air, too many feet above the ground to be real, with his arm up and his glove ready, and the ball just slapped into that glove like a magnet pulled it there. Birdman could throw, too, like Willie Mays could throw, like a magician that makes a dove appear out of nowhere. He could throw a ball into the sky, and it'd soar like a bird and land just where it should, safely in someone else's glove. Birdman was only with us for about a year, but we liked him real fine, and he made a difference in an interesting kind of way, just from some of the things he did, like saving Mr. Levine's cat. That's the thing that got to me. In the kiddie books they give you in elementary school to learn how to read, there'd sometimes be a story about a cat getting stuck up in a tree. The pictures in the book would show a fireman coming to the rescue in his truck and going up a ladder to bring the cat down and putting it in the arms of a pretty little girl in a pink dress. Well, first off, there weren't any trees in our part of Chicago, not back then anyway, and the fire department wasn't likely to show up to help when a bad-tempered feline that only liked Mr. Levine and no one else got herself stuck up on a fire escape and didn't know what to do next. We'd been riding by on our bikes and stopped to see what was what because it was unusual to see old Mr. Levine out of his shop. He was pointing up at the cat and going back and forth in English and, I don't know, his other kind of language that maybe was German. And he was sort of crying and trying to explain to a couple folks there on the sidewalk that the cat wouldn't come down. We might have just kept going, but Birdman got off his bike and went up to Mr. Levine and stood there with his head to the side like he was considering what he might be able to do. Then he put his hand on Mr. Levine's arm, right where the numbers were tattooed, and said, "Can I help?" Mr. Levine looked at Birdman and a tear rolled down his cheek and he said, "Robin, she go out the window, she won't come down." Birdman says, "Your cat's name is Robin?" Mr. Levine says, yes, Robin." And Birdman grins and pats the old man's arm and goes right over to that old fire escape and stands underneath it and looks up. I don't know if you know what those fire escapes are like on those old brick buildings, but they're designed a lot more for going down than going up. There's platforms on every story of the building and ladders to go down, but the ladder on the lowest level doesn't go down to the ground, but it's held up by a hinge. If you're going down, you can undo the hinge and lower the ladder, but you can't reach that level from the street. But Birdman, after he spends a minute looking up at all those metal bars and railings and ladders, it's just like he's on the baseball field. He jumps into the air higher than you think anyone could and gets hold of a bar on the bottom platform. You could see his stomach below the edge of his t-shirt as he was hanging there, and you could see there was a hole in one of his gym shoes, but he only hangs there a minute before he pulls himself up and starts to climb. All of us down on the sidewalk were watching him. There was our gang and Mr. Levine and a couple men from some of the other shops and some of the people who had just been walking by and stopped to see what was happening. In that moment, Birdman showed all of us, showed everyone, that you could rise and climb and scramble and be a hero, even if you didn't have a lot else going for you, even if you were only a kid. So yeah, he got up to the cat, who maybe recognized him as a fellow creature that had some kinship with her on account of their names, and somehow decided Birdman didn't deserve to be scratched to pieces. We see Birdman pick her up and tuck her under his t-shirt right against his chest, so she's kind of cradled like a little baby. Then he stands up and works his way down. When Birdman is back on Earth, he takes Robin out from under his t-shirt and places her in Mr. Levine's arms. The old man hugs her to his own chest and pulls the sides of his sweater around her. Then he pulls Birdman close and hugs him and cries a little more and says stuff to Birdman that's probably thank you. The crying and hugs for pretty much anybody else would have been, I don't know, not done or embarrassing or something. But Birdman just hugged him back like he understood the etiquette of that moment, like he'd understood the etiquette of the Sandlot when we first met him. At the end, he smiled at Mr. Levine, rubbed the cat on her ears, then picked up his bike and got on, and it was the signal for the rest of us to head on down the street. One day, Birdman tells us he's moving away. His folks got an apartment on the south side closer to the steel mill where his old man worked. Then he wasn't there, and we found somebody else for the outfield. But Birdman stayed in our heads in a certain way, at least in my head. Sometimes you learn stuff from someone, even if you're not really paying attention. Birdman showed that you could soar, like Willie Mays, like a magician, like Burt Lancaster. And even if you had a kind of prison around you, you could climb and fly and be free and be a Birdman. So that's from my new book coming out, which is called The Second Chance Shop and Other Stories. And I've got stories about like everything weird in this
Mill City. And so I'm attracted to stories that have to do with history, that have to do with science and technology, and that's why cities like this attract me with all the history we have here. So this is my novella, which is my bestseller of the season. It's called Salem Switch, and it's a time travel adventure it's a steampunk adventure, which is what I am. It's like the Victorian era or the Industrial Revolution, if we had gone a different way with technology. So this book, they're time traveling from the late 1800s back to the Salem witch trials, where because they're women and they're smart, they must be witches. So they have to figure out how to get their way back home and emancipate the other witches, but they might actually find themselves in some witchcraft trouble along the way. But I'm going to read to you just the first chapter, and I'll give you, I'll spoil the last chapter for you at the end. So this is chapter 1. A flash of lightning burst inside the cold laboratory, and a sonic boom shook the foundation. The lanterns flickered as a loud squawk echoed in the concrete chamber. Dag nabbit, the bird is still here. Come, Lamar, I'm glad to see you, but I had hoped to send you on a time travel adventure. The blue budgerigar hopped on little clawed feet and flew lightly to Tess's outstretched finger. Tess cooed at the quaint creature. You have done a fine job. The failure is mine, not yours. She set Lamar down onto an elaborate perch, a veritable bird playground with spinning mirrors, ramps and ladders, swings and slides. Lamar chewed some hanging millet, her reward for work well done. That's the third time we've tried that, lamented Tess. What in the heck are we doing wrong? She flopped into her high-backed seat at the lab table and ground her fists into her eyes. Verdandi untwined a wrench from Tess's knotted black hair. I know you are using work to distract yourself from your breakup with Hugh, but you are allowed to feel your sadness. Tess grunted an unladylike reply. Verdandi pressed a remote control knob on her prosthetic arm, and a tea tray floated over. She poured chamomile tea to settle Tess's nerves. Tess felt relief enter her body with the very first sip of soothing liquid. She was finally coaxed into taking a break when Verdandi implored her with additional trays of scones. Tess spread cream and jam over her hot pastry. Thank you for tempting me to rest, dear child. I am overwrought with frustration. Failure after failure is diminishing my zest. She took a dainty bite of her sweet treat. It is okay to take a breather. You are allowed. Tess placed the scone down onto her delicate china plate. Fiery fervor flashed in her blue eyes. I need to be the one to discover time travel and invent conductors between eras. I must be first. Why? Is it a contest? Can't you enjoy the process just as well without the sense of competition? I must be the one, Tess insisted. She replaced her plate onto the hovering tray. More than anything in the world, I wish to be the one who discovers time travel. Imagine the possibilities. I can imagine, Professor, answered Verdandi. She had been an apprentice to the great mastermind for a number of years, and now that she was a young woman, she felt a kinship with her, as well as awe at her mentor's genius. Yet part of what I imagine is etched with fear. You lack patience with yourself. If you could extend the patience you offer me to yourself, you might be able to release anxiety and see your work from a different perspective. The professor smiled and held her hand over the student's warm, flesh one. I'm lucky to have such a darling, intelligent girl look out for me. I appreciate your assistance. I know my pride is mighty, but that is part of what drives me to create world-changing inventions. Verdandi's freckled face flushed with the kind words her idol nourished her with. I'm glad to learn from you. Now I am old enough to understand more than you might realize. I do not mean solely in the maths and sciences. I mean in matters of the heart. Tess removed her hand from Verdandi's and raised an eyebrow. I understand that your heart is broken over the severed relationship you have recently experienced with Hugh. It seems that you are frantically working in an effort to distract yourself from your feelings. Tess sighed and brushed invisible crumbs from her long skirts. I still believe that what has been ripped can be patched up, Verdandi added carefully. Tess jumped up from her seat, upsetting Lamar, who had hopped over to nibble on a broken scone while the two scientists talked. What is it? asked Verdandi. She was not alarmed at the sudden change of attitude. Rather, she was curious. What inspiration struck the professor? It struck hard. Lamar flew to the crown of Tess's head. "We have attempted to send you back 200 years, 3 times already," said Tess gently. "I think that is enough." "We could try again," said Verdandi. Tess's eyes shone. "We will." Lamar flew back to her birdie playground. "I love this bird. I love this bird as a man loves a woman, but better." Her face clouded over with the memory of Hugh's sharp words. "This time, we will try again, but we will try it differently. It's time to up our game, raise the stakes for science's sakes." Tess stood beneath the glass dome attached to the night switch on the far wall. Verdandi pulled the switch. Again and again. 3 times lightning struck. 3 times the earth rumbled. And 3 times the genius professor fumed with the flame of failure. She left the dome and lay herself down next to the bird's colorful hut. Lamar hopped atop her forehead. "Thank you for caring, Lamar." A rustle of feathers gusted over them. A white pigeon settled on a large perch by the window and lifted a leg. Verdandi retrieved the message. "The mail service has delivered an odd-looking scroll addressed to you," said Verdandi. "Read it, please," said Tess, covering her eyes with a forearm as she lay back. And then I'm going to fast forward a little bit. "No, it's too dangerous under these conditions. I'm the professor. I know what I'm doing. This is my invention after all. Flip the switch!" With 2 hands, Verdandi lifted the heavy handle. Sparks flew as the arc lamp lighted and shone with dazzling light of fireworks. Yellow, then red, then blue, then green. Verdandi closed her eyes to the scorching brightness. Her face was flecked with flying shards of burning metal. The laboratory shook while the wind outside roared, as if alive with anger. Inside the lab, papers flew from an invisible source, and a loud pop burst the ceiling. Shards of glass rained down. "Professor!" shouted Verdandi. Lamar squawked. Where the professor had stood was only a swirl of green smoke. Professor Tess Alsett was gone. Verdandi knelt to the wet floor as the generator yet sparked. Wires hung limply from the cords of currentless connections. "She did it," whispered the young scientist. "She has traveled back 200 years, if her calibrations were correct, to 1693. Or she is dead." She held her head in her hands as her wet red hair stuck to her face and cried. But spoiler alert, she's not dead. The rest of the book still exists. Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, so this is 28 Days of Neon, Chapter 1, Wednesday morning, 7 a.m. I cross and uncross my legs, jiggle my right foot and think, again and again. If I were a cartoon and there was one of those cartoon bubbles above my head, it would look like this. Empty, blank, nothing, nothing, nothing. I could fill that cartoon bubble if this were pre-algebra or social studies, but this looking deep into my soul, introspective type stuff isn't working for me. Except it has to, because I have to get a miracle before the 2,419,200 seconds I have left, tick-tock, tick-tock, all the way to nothingness. 2,419,200 seconds, tick. 40,320 minutes, tock. 672 hours, tick. 28 days, tock. I have 28 days left to live, which is why I'm counting by seconds, and why it makes me more than a little bit anxious to realize that in the 10 minutes I took to write this, I'm down by 600. 2,418,600 seconds left to live.
Oh, yeah.
Flashback, 15 minutes before. I'm walking past Mom and Dad's bedroom before school when I hear, I thought we decided not to tell Neon, not to ruin her last 4 weeks. Last 4 weeks? Are we moving or something? I stop short and slide my feet flat across a nubby mocha carpet so I can slink closer without making a sound. Rainbow pads silently beside me, with thick black fur shedding against my red flannel pajama pants. We press our ears against the door. Rainbow's floppy ears point straight up in listening mode. She's only 12, Mom's voice catches, then breaks. Like she's crying? Honey, Dr. Shizzle said, Dad begins. What doctor? I press my ear harder against the door and focus on making her comfortable, he finishes. Comfortable? Since when do my parents worry about making me comfortable? We already have the best lazy boy love seat recliner in town. Can't believe 4 weeks, only 28 days. I never thought. No doubt about it, Mom is crying, definitely crying. We'd lose her so soon. Rainbow's tail thumps the wall. Neon, Dad calls, is that you out there? I lift my index finger to my lips and pat Rainbow on the rump so she'll follow me down the hall to my room. I walk inside to get dressed for school, then sit on the crumpled lavender quilt on my unmade bed instead to figure out what my parents were talking about. But their words are a mixed up jumble crashing inside my brain. 4 weeks, only 12. Lose her, lose her, lose her. Make her comfortable, not tell. 4 weeks, make her comfortable. Doctor, only 12. 28 days. Until they're not. Breakfast, 30 minutes later, as in now. I am gulping down my first spoonful of whole grain organic oat oats, topped with milk squeezed from holy cows and blueberries of pure unpesticided joy, as Rainbow wanders into the kitchen. She plops her furry self on the wood floor across my freezing feet. I snuggle my toes under my living, breathing foot warmer. Well, Neon, Dad looks up from the morning news on his iPhone. What's on the agenda at school these days? Then he smiles. I spit out half my mouthful of cereal as the goddesses of all things organic quiver in shock. Dad never talks at breakfast until his second cup and a half of coffee, unless he's thinking out loud about amps or circuit breakers or other electrician stuff. And I have never seen him smile, coffee or no coffee, before 7:23 a.m. Never. Whatever the doctor told my parents, it must be worse than I thought. Scratch that. 28 days to live is as bad as it gets. I try to smile at Dad, but a happy, smiley feeling is not exactly the emotion I'm having right now. I don't get it. Why isn't Dad looking at me with his protect me from the world eyes and telling me the truth in his gentlest dad in the galaxy voice? I look down at the pine kitchen table and focus on the swirly brown knot next to my cereal bowl to hide the fire-hot tears burning my eyes. But the fireworks burning through my brain are exploding. I try to figure out what to say without giving away the fact that I was eavesdropping. Hang on, Dad's not about to go apoplectic over my eavesdropping when I only have 28 days to live, is he? Dad, I begin. Then my oats plummet to the pit of my stomach. If I ask, if Dad answers, I'm not ready. I'm not ready to hear it from Dad for real. So, Dad puts down his phone. What's new in 7th grade land? He rests his chin in his hand, aims his green eyes at me and waits. Not much, I finally say. Give me one, he says, using his trademark technique for getting around a nothing-type answer, as Mom comes into the kitchen. In life skills yesterday, Miss Fraser said, "You're as ready as you'll ever be for 8th grade. My job is done." Then we watched Pirates of the Caribbean 5. The other teachers scored Pirates 1, 2, 3, and 4 from the Library Media Center before Miss Fraser could get them. Sounds fine to me. You'll be working hard enough in 8th grade, Dad smiles again, sending shudders of shock through my nervous system. It's a whole new ballgame. Just enjoy it, sweetheart. Mom walks behind my chair, smooths my light brown hair, and wraps her arms around my shoulders. It's not every day you can goof off in school. They're good. Really good. Mom doesn't even tear up as she hugs me. Who knew my parents were such good liars? Life skills, my view. Never drink alcohol, never take drugs. Do not hold hands with boys until you are 40. Life skills class was supposed to get us ready for infinity and beyond, aka 8th grade, high school, and happily forever after. It used to be co-ed until a few nosy parents complained about the girls and boys being together while learning about whisper, 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 shh. So now they divide us for all the juicy, important stuff, which turned out to be everything, which pretty much tanked the whole point of life skills. It would have been a whole lot more useful to keep the boys with us. That way, when Eddie Rasmussen snapped my bra when we were standing in the hall before class last week and said I have great knockers. Hang on, 2 points here. First off, What 12-year-old boy says knockers? And secondly, considering that I'm still wearing a training bra, my knockers aren't exactly doing any knocking. Anyway, when Eddie did that, Miss Fraser would have seen the only rational response was to punch him. How was I supposed to know he'd had a root canal that morning? The principal, Miss Goodworthy, said I should have reported him for sexual harassment. She said Eddie had no right to do or say that stuff because my body is private and Eddie has to learn appropriate behavior. My point exactly. I just figured a punch in the jaw was a good way to teach him. Which goes back to my question. What use is life skills if all we've learned is how to deal with other 12-year-old girls, who, by the way, will not be 12 for much longer? If Miss Fraser doesn't see the jerk-faced boys in action, how will she know when to teach us to punch them in the jaw and when to teach us to tell the principal? I've known Eddie Rasmussen ever since we were in toddler tempos and tunes together. He was a jerk face at 2 and he's a jerk face at 12. He bullies everyone, girl, boy, or 12-year-old puppy. Eddie Rasmussen has always been an equal opportunity jerk face. And if life skills isn't going to teach the rest of us how to deal with a jerk face like him, then life skills equals no skills, equals one big fat waste of time.
To feed the meter, like thinking they'd remember next time. I mentioned the stack of tickets piling up on whatever we'd found to use as a dresser. That was before I learned that one of the women was married to a cop. The phone rang. It was Emmon. We would need to get some money together for bail and find a lawyer. There was controlled panic in his voice. Then he was gone. I called my mother in tears and she said she would be there in the morning. The image of the cop with his hand on Emmon's head, pushing him slowly and methodically down into the squad car, wouldn't leave me alone. I pulled Carolyn's crib next to our bed and somehow slept. Emmon was released when my mother produced the last $200 she and my grandfather had. He walked hurriedly into the apartment and grabbed the phone book. Every lawyer he called, even those recommended by people at work, wanted a retainer in funds we did not have. It didn't matter that Emmon had been part of the force for good in Chicago's black community. Now he was just one of those needy people with legal problems and no money, the kind they didn't take a chance on. He sat with the yellow pages open, shoulders stooped. After a few calls, he gave up. We finished packing. My mother had assigned my brother Steve to help us move. When he arrived, we put the car bed into the back seat of the VW and snuggled Carolyn into it. Steve took the wheel of the van and we drove away. We left Chicago forever in the middle of the night.
Vaccines to the Depression. It is based on more than 1,000 letters that my dad wrote to my mom during World War II. And I remember finding those letters when I was about 17, and I picked up the first one and read some of it, and it was very mushy, and you might be able to relate that at 17, I didn't want to read mushy from my father to my mother. I didn't even want to think about mushy between them. And then I began my little writing journey when COVID hit, and I wrote a first novel, and then in thinking about what I'd write second, I remember those letters that were in my recently deceased brother's possession, and I asked his wife for them, and I read all 1,000 and whatever letters he wrote daily. She wrote daily too, but it's a mystery what happened to her letters. Maybe he couldn't carry them around from place to place while the war was going on. So the letters were fascinating to read. Sometimes they were boring as all get out because a lot of it was I love you, I miss you, I love you, I miss you, I love you, I miss you. And I wanted to say, but tell me what's going on right now. The character, my dad, whom the character is based on, never ends up on the front line because he's training to be a pilot. And the war ended before his training ended. And so anyway, read all those letters. There was some really interesting stuff. I'm a former English teacher, and his writing was remarkably sound, remarkable to me. I thought this writing, in my opinion, was equivalent to an honors level student in 2000 or 1980 or 90. I just think the teaching of writing was better. I think probably from the grade school level on, it was just better for whatever reason. Maybe there were less distractions, I don't know. But his spelling was sound, his sentence structure was sound, his usage was sound. Really, really good writing. And I never knew him as someone who wrote anything. He was a plumbing contractor. And so I was stunned at his sound writing and the eloquence with which he expressed himself in these letters. So in the book there are letters, most of which are my dad's words directly. Sometimes I did some work on them depending on what was happening. But I took what I knew about my parents' lives and what I learned in these letters, and I created a fictional account. And so the two characters meet at a dance. It was the big band era, so this era of Hollywood and big band music and dancing is a really important part of the novel, that kind of stuff. And so I have the two characters meet at a dance. My parents did not meet at a dance. They met on a blind date, but they both loved dancing, and she apparently was rather good at it. So I thought today I'd read a little passage when he first asks her to dance. So let me find that. Yeah. So here's my passage. With no time to waste, he moved closer to the girl as In the Mood drew to its conclusion. On the last note, Michael moved in and addressed the GI instead of the beautiful girl. If you don't mind, soldier, I'd like to have the next dance with the young lady. As the miffed GI withdrew, the girl turned to see Michael's piercing brown eyes, and his dark curly hair. May I? Michael asked. She smiled. Yes, you may. It was Michael's good fortune that the next number was The Nearness of You, a foxtrot. As the clarinets, accompanied by saxophones and muted brass, began the romantic introduction, Michael placed his right hand firmly on the small of the girl's back and took her right hand in his left. Leading her in a box step, he wasn't surprised at how effortlessly she followed him, having just witnessed her in action. And what might your name be? Michael asked, mustering up as much charm as possible. My name might be Cecilia. What might your name be? My name might be Michael, he replied, liking the game they were playing. Michael, nice name, she said. Well, why don't I call you Michael, and why don't you call me Cecilia, even if those are only what our names might be? Cecilia's sharp wit wasn't lost on Michael. Very cute. I try. With undeniable confidence, she pursed her painted red lips and flashed a flawless white smile at him, and he knew he was a goner. Suddenly, Michael felt a tap on his shoulder. Glancing to his left, he saw a sailor standing there with a dumb look on his face. Mind if I cut in, pal? Yeah, I do mind, Michael replied. This isn't the senior prom, so get lost. Don't worry, sweetie, Cecilia interjected. I'll dance with you next. As the sailor backed off, Cecilia remarked, wow, you're rather possessive of girls you dance with, aren't you, Michael? Sorry, it's just that when I focus on something, I don't like being distracted. Well, in case you haven't noticed, Michael, I'm not a something, I'm a somebody. Yes you are, he said, welcoming the repartee. Believe me, it's the first thing I noticed about you. Me, myself, let's just say I'm hoping to be somebody. Cecilia smiled and looked directly into his eyes, where she saw intelligence and veracity. Looking back into hers, Michael was hopelessly blinded by her beauty. When the song ended, the sailor wasted no time in moving in, propelling Michael back to the outer margins of the dance space, once again a spectator. That's my little piece. So thank you for this opportunity. This is fun. And you're all very nice. And you said you're Victoria, right? Thank you, Victoria.
Wait, let me just take a picture.
I think that might work.
I just want to take a still.
That was why you were here.
Okay, here, there. Okay, okay. Great job.
Thank you.
Okay, up next is, I'm sorry, Simone Morris.
Hello and happy Saturday, everybody that's in the library. My name is Simone Morris, and I'm going to be reading an excerpt from 52 Tips for Owning Your Career. I thought it would be lovely to tell a little bit about my story before diving into the book. So I'll do a bit about my story and my journey to being passionate about getting into the driver's seat in your career, and then I'll read an excerpt from the book. Introduction, my story. One of my favorite poems is from the author Marianne Williamson, and some of you might know this poem. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? That's a little piece of it. I love that so much, and Nelson Mandela also used this poem. So I start the chapter out in that way, and then I go into my story. Have you ever been so confused that you didn't know if you were coming or going in your career? I wasn't sure what career path I wanted to take. I was on the family career path to becoming a secretary. My 3 older sisters were secretaries, and I looked up to them, so it became a natural path for me to explore as a career path. However, an influential high school teacher, Miss S. at Stanford High School, changed that path. She believed in me and helped to build my confidence. Through her nurturing, I would go on to receive a $500 scholarship from Sacred Heart University. As a result of that win, I was encouraged to expand my vision and explore additional possibilities for my future. After conferring with my guidance counselor, who reminded me of my low SAT scores, we landed on 2 schools for consideration. I got accepted to Johnson & Wales in Providence, Rhode Island, and Quinnipiac College in Hamden, Connecticut. The distance was the tiebreaker, and I settled on Quinnipiac College, which was almost 50 miles from home. I chose to major in marketing retail management because of my work at Macy's department store and my leftover dreams of wanting to be a model. My new dream was to become a retail buyer, traveling the world, selecting beautiful clothes for consumers to enjoy. After 4 years, I expected my dream to be realized, but I was devastated when my Macy's door closed. I received a rejection letter indicating that I was not accepted into the Macy's Leadership Training Program. I need some music too. That was a pivotal moment for me. I was very disappointed. Because I had all my eggs in one basket, I had no idea what I would do and found myself moving back to my skill set of being a secretary. The very thing that I ran from came full circle, and I ended up being a secretary for a full year. The pay was excellent and I was good at the job. However, it was short-lived because I knew there was more for me, so I pushed forward to take advantage of my college education. I started out as a customer service rep, but found the desk constraints not to my liking. So I shifted to the internal training department, where I coordinated training events and managed vendor deliverables. That decision led to being a full-time software trainer, business analyst, and application developer. There I would spend decades hoping to climb the corporate ladder to a director-level position and beyond. I made it to the senior management level but didn't secure the director position, even though I applied for several internal director position opportunities. With each passing year, my confidence continued to spiral downward. I couldn't understand why the powers, managers, and people in authority didn't recognize my worth and classification as top talent. I became disillusioned. A part of me gave up and decided that work was work and life on the outside was just that. Therefore, I began to create a dual identity on the outside to fulfill my daily return to the workplace where I trudged along, doing my job and collecting my paycheck. It wasn't until the world of employee resource groups was introduced to me that I felt a spark about work. I had no idea that it was the beginning of a new career chapter for me. The career change gave me access to the C-suite, mentoring, amplification of my leadership brand and voice, and senior level sponsorship to move my career forward. Through ERG leadership, I became more confident in my value proposition and redesigned my career roadmap. The eye-opening keys to my success include a willingness to prioritize my career and take accountability for the lack of results I was getting. Trust me, it took me a long time to get past blaming others for my lack of progression. I received my fair share of mistreatment, but I played a role by going along to get along. The reality is, we always have a choice whether we clearly see and own that when in the moment or not. Sometimes we're unwilling to accept the consequence of our choices, though which keeps us rooted in situations that rob us of our smiles and our worth. Today I have the talent and directive to help rebuild women who have been broken in their careers. Broken is in reference to deep pain caused by career disappointments and ill treatment in the workplace. I know this because I've experienced career despair and frustration more than once in my career. It's not a good feeling, but with proper support, you can learn from the experience and move forward fruitfully. Over the years, women with these experiences have sought me out as a coach for guidance on turning the tide. When this happens and there is a commitment to take accountability for their roles, plus a willingness to do the work necessary, game-changing results occur, and there's no turning back. I have the receipts that I can help, and that is enough to continue to pour into others who seek out the coveted driver's seat position in their careers. I'll always be grateful for the education, empowerment, resources, and lifelong friendships I gained from my time in corporate America. Those lessons were necessary for true career transformation. Are y'all still there? Okay, just a brief blurb here. Step one in my formula for owning my career is, I call it claim. Step one, claim. We must put stakes in the ground to show our commitment to our careers. I deserve to be happy in my career, and understand this, you do too. I deserve to build my own table from the ground up, extending VIP seats to those I choose to. I deserve to reach the end of my life and know that my career body of work had my input all over it. And the same goes for you. I didn't always know that, so I didn't behave in that manner. But as Maya Angelou asserted, when you know better, you do better. Today I can say that I'm the CEO of my career, making choices that represent my needs and desired goals. And I want the same for you, so whatever mindset work you need to do to make this bold claim, I'm here to support you. When I interviewed businesswoman, speaker, and author Pegeen Echevarria, she said that she carves out the first 17 minutes of her day to pour into herself. She speaks affirmations that remind her of her brilliance, and what speaker, coach, and author Kelly Charles Collins calls badassery. For me, I surround myself with accountability that reinforces the beliefs that I deserve the career path I've outlined for myself. I also invest in a relationship with a mental health practitioner and a career coach to ensure that I'm debunking the limiting beliefs that threaten to derail my commitment to a new career chapter. I need to stay the course and not give in to the fear that will cause me to run back to my comfort level every time the career goings get rough. Your action is focusing on your mindset to ensure that you believe you need to be in the driver's seat for your career. You get to make decisions for the betterment of your career. So go forward and claim what you deserve in your career. Step 2, audit. Continuously audit your career. The audit is done to meet you where you are on your career journey. It means pruning items that are no longer in congruence with your purpose. Auditing is important because it allows you to look below the surface and gain data points that lead to informed decisions, positioning you to know what's working and what's not working. Only then can you move forward with creating greater change. In the early days of my business, to bring in revenue, I was leveraging all the talents that I had. When I finally sat down and conducted an audit, I realized that I wanted to offload teaching project management. Although I love the structure and rigor of delivering project, it was a huge part of my past career chapter from which I had evolved. Being in the driver's seat means offloading what no longer serves you. It means not being afraid to make the right decisions for you, and the key is enforcing boundaries to uphold your new career decisions. If you can't do it alone, and quite honestly, you shouldn't do it alone. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Get support in the form of a coach or a mastermind partner to help hold yourself accountable. Doing continuous audits will get you to a place that brings you joy to shine and thrive in your career. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, everyone, next up is Aaliyah Zobel Nolan.
Oh, my goodness. If I get on here, I might not be able to get off. We'll see. Good afternoon, everyone. This is one of my books. It's called The Worrywart's Prayer Book. Because when I was very young, my mother was worried about everything, so she taught me well. She was worried about dust mites and radon and enough leaves putting a dent on her car. So I sort of kind of picked up that. And so something happened to me. I got a very bad disease when I broke my arm. I got something called reflex sympathetic dystrophy. And it meant that everything felt like shingles. Everything I touched felt like shingles. Well, one day I was just so sick and tired of the pain that I screamed bloody murder at God, and I said, you have to handle this. You have to do this for me. And so, if you do, I'm going to pay back by writing the book, The Worrywart's Prayer Book. So here it is, The Worrywart's Prayer Book. The one thing I'm going to read to you is about finding a mate. All right. Other than being seen in a bathing suit by anyone, anywhere, one of the scariest things a worrywart has to deal with in this lifetime, and I'll concentrate on us women, though it's a problem for men too, is finding a mate. With that in mind, I offer up a light-hearted fairy tale. Once upon a time, a woman I know who looks suspiciously like me spent years fretting over finding a husband. Not so much because she wanted to, but because it was the national female pastime of the century. Back in those antediluvian times, the equation was woman plus marriage equal happiness. And with so much at stake, her worrywart juices were constantly overflowing.
She worried she wasn't pretty enough, or smart enough, or helpless enough to find Mr. Right, and that if he didn't come along soon, she'd wind up a tired old maid, living alone on a dusty shelf next to the baked beans and the stale crackers. Needless to say, she prayed often and in earnest that God would put an end to her misery. Yet through it all, she continued to worry, which did nothing for her complexion, not to mention her disposition, which was becoming so caustic, even her close friends avoided her. Then suddenly, she had an epiphany one day. Was God perhaps trying to tell her something, she thought? Did he want her to remain single? Maybe he knew something, that she didn't. Maybe she wasn't ready, or perhaps maybe he was working something out in her that couldn't happen if she were married. Maybe he wanted her to grow more, experience more. Maybe he wanted her to get to know herself and what she wanted out of life better, so she could make a better choice of who she wanted to spend that life with. When this finally hit her, she did an about-face. She took off her makeup and high heels, got down on her knees, and right then and there, the whole search for a mate crusade, she handed that over to the Almighty. Dear God, she prayed, I'd love to get married, but if being single's the way you want me to live, then so be it. Having accepted God's will for her, she was free at last to be the person she was, not the person everyone else wanted her to be. She stopped living her life as a single and started living it as a person. She quit the single scene and buckled down to her work. Then when all the statistics said she had a better chance of finding oil in a cactus than of finding a mate, she met, fell in love with, and married a nice young man. Emphasis on the young. Because she put things in God's hands, he put her precisely where she needed to be when he sent Mr. Right, not on a white horse, but in a burgundy Ford, into her life. And she's lived happily ever after since. Okay, so the story's about me, but I can't help telling it. It's personal, it's true, and I pray it appeals to the sensibilities of worrywarts out there who agonize over finding a mate. I urge you to remember, God knows what you need, and he's more than willing to give it to you. Now, a very wise older man named Evangelist Ponticus explained in a book he wrote called Chapters on Prayer that trying to pressure God into giving us what we want instead of praying for him to help us want the right things, what is best for us, is where we run into trouble. Because if what we want isn't in accordance with God's will, things often backfire, he says. Then too, quite often when we get what we want, it isn't all it's cracked up to be. The smart option is to ask for what is good and what is the best for your soul, because there is no way you could want these things for yourself more than God desires you to have them. In the meantime, though, do me a favor, please. Get rid of the notion that because you haven't met your soul mate as yet, life is something to be tolerated until he or she comes along. Instead, live the life God has put in front of you today. Don't make yourself crazy with worry over something that might not happen today, but if it's God's will, could certainly happen tomorrow, or next week, or next month. Almost done. Okay. Because when Mr. Wonderful or Miss Wonderful does come along, you don't want to have so many worry lines that you scare him off, now do you? P.S. This business of letting go really works. If you don't believe my story, consider the apostles. They fished all night until they were dog-tired, but they didn't catch a thing. Yet as soon as they gave up, Jesus was able to fill their nets to breaking. You can tell God you aren't interested in lots of fish in the sea. You're just looking for the right one. That's it. Oh, the name of the book is The Worrywart's Prayer Book.
Okay, and coming right up is Carol Ann Moletti.
Hello, everybody. It's always so nice to be at this event. I enjoy it so much. I had two choices to read, and I decided to go with the more lighthearted one. I think we're all feeling a little down, and I didn't want to go even further down. So I chose something that I wrote quite a while ago that I think is kind of funny, and I thought it would be hopefully cheer people up. So I am a nurse practitioner and midwife, born and raised in the Bronx, spent most of my career working in the Bronx, and taking care of medically underserved persons. And right now I am working in still COVID relief as well as migrant relief. So my days can be very long and stressful, but I love what I do, but I also enjoy my time off. So this little essay is called "'Tis the Season." I swore off the ambience of luxuriant red and white poinsettia displays and holiday music. No more standing in line for hours to see my daughter refuse to sit on Santa's lap unless an older brother I bribed with an electronic gift goes with her. Forget paying $27.50 for the lousy picture of her trying to get away and a sullen teenager assuring Santa he had sent his list in already. The box containing the dancing reindeer, nesting Santa and Rudolph's salt and pepper shakers, and the crystal tree were still in the attic. They once held great emotional significance, remnants of time with my ex-husband, my best girlfriend who canceled our friendship because I didn't call her enough, but I'm all over that now. The realities of life, work, and not enough time had stolen away the magical enthusiasm of the holiday season. Our boys are old enough to understand that Santa faces tough trials, and then the market will open up right after Christmas. I did most of my shopping online instead of in line, sent emailed photos, and prepared envelopes containing cash for my nieces and nephews, just like Grandma used to do. Gone are the days when I joined packs of crazed women who'd heard that they were indeed getting a shipment of Beanie Babies, or paying 3 times the list price for select Pokemon merchandise, has been abandoned, along with special holiday rituals like all-day trips upstate to tramp through the mud and snow to cut down a crooked, stunted Christmas tree. I once envisioned my kids revering their mother, who loved them enough to make a fool out of herself, taking them on urban shopping adventures that would go down in history. Now, they are sure I'm nuts, expletive deleted. The excitement of the hunt is now confined to scouting bargains in the big chains and saving a lot of money by spending hundreds on clothes and household goods. The trees sold on the corner are no more expensive when you consider gas and mileage. They stand up straight and aren't missing an entire side from going fructose to a neighboring tree. The spirit goddess of Christmas and family tradition is invincible, however. 1 week before Christmas, she stirred in me. I baked 5 batches of cookies and sent an unprecedented number of fruit baskets to the remaining names on my list. But the biggest challenge lay ahead. I still needed something that would assuage the Christmas morning grief of my daughter, who'd asked for the life-size battery-operated Barbie car. Santa could not cave on that one. I took a deep breath and hit the toy store in the ethnic polyglot of my old Bronx neighborhood, hearing more Spanish than English interspersed with the musical happy tones of Caribbean accents. I had not lost my touch and scattered out the last toy shopping cart hidden on another display with a box too huge to carry. There were no real shopping carts. It is a toy store 4 days before Christmas. But I grabbed a kitty laptop because my daughter wanted to type all the time just like Mommy. I rounded it out bowl with plastic food and a can opener with realistic sounds. The shopping goddess creates a heightened awareness while on the hunt. I noted a line in electronics and a security guard. Her dampened spirit spurred me on. "Do you have any game systems?" I whispered to the guard. "Yes," he whispered back. "Not sure how many though." "Okay." I mouthed my reply and pushed the waist-high box with the other gifts piled on top to the end of the line. Before long, some 30 gamers in punk, chains, leather, and spiked hair mingled in with a few grandmothers looking for some game the kids want. A Mr. T type with a gun tucked into a holster worked the crowd, wiggling his butt and doing a fast-talking, finger-snapping routine. He schmoozed us with assurances that if we stayed orderly, we'd all be good to go. Another very large gentleman walked the line in his uniform vest with a drunken giraffe on it. He looked like he needed a break from elf duty as he made mental notes so that no one could skunk the others by overbuying, selling their place in line for $50, or cutting ahead. The Muzak was actually festive, the mood merry and bright. I learned more about gaming than I ever cared to know in the hour and a half I waited. My husband called me every 3 minutes for updates, still trying to figure out how I got so lucky. I assured him it was the goddess thing, and that the nunchuck controller was the best one to get for extra, and that we really did need the dock and accessory storage system. Mr. Bouncer showed his true skill at conflict resolution when a father and son team split up and tried to buy 2 systems. Puffing out his ample chest and posing with bulging arms on hips, he assured them it was one or none, their choice. I wondered if there would be crossfire. Remember, we are in the Bronx, but all was well. I'm the woman, I gyrated and sang. The visions of my son on Christmas morning and at least one day of not being called an uncharitable name for suggesting they put laundry in the hamper and do homework danced in my head. The gentleman just ahead joined me in a duet with his rendition on demand, on demand. I had Dios Mio, the grandmother behind me, with whom I had passed the time solving the problems of the world, just rolled her eyes. A sullen cashier scanned in the shopping cart, canned food, kitty laptop, and then Rio. I dragged the bags out of the aisle. The goddess had rose from the ashes. I'll escort you to your car, ma'am, said another associate whose jacket with the Junkin giraffe barely zipped around his middle. What customer service, I thought. I'm okay. I struggled to the door where the guard examined the receipt on my bags to be sure I wasn't shoplifting. I will put that game system in an opaque bag and take you to your car. This guy was not taking no for an answer. Native Bronx girls never expect anyone to dare try any nonsense. But when the 4th very large gentleman of the day walked me past a throng of garlic-scented, greasy-haired, alleged cabbies, I was reminded of the gypsies in Naples, Italy. In that famed city of thieves, the naive are left stranded after a wild ride to nowhere, relieved of anything of value before they even realize what hit them. Doors locked and the game system next to me on the floor, hidden inside 2 bags and under a coat. I received mission instructions from my escort. Do not leave this in the car and watch behind you. The spirit of the goddess still surged within me, and I headed off to complete the shopping for our Christmas Eve feast. The supermarket in the Italian enclave of Pelham Bay is the only place I can find artichokes in sufficient quantity for an extended family of 24 plus a few stragglers. And nowhere else is there a 4-foot-tall woman dressed in black with her hair in a bun, sharing useful information like why female artichokes are better than males and how to tell the difference. I clutched the game system to my chest along with the pepperoni, provolone cheese, and an equal mix of 24 spiny male and female vegetables. The elevated subway roared overhead. Pigeons scattered. Was it a diversion? Watching my back, I loaded the car and hit the bakery for my husband's traditional chocolate birthday cake with strawberry and cannoli cream filling for Christmas decorations. An old man speaking Italian hobbled in, cut in front of me, ordered pastry, coffee with milk and 2 sugars, and distracted the counter girl with the demands she carried to a table. Something about his Neapolitan dialect and wild gesticulation reminded me of those gypsies. He might be after more than just a sfiliatelle of coffee. I clutched my precious bundle close. That sucker was not getting my weed. That night, visions of sugar plums danced in my head, and I basked in the afterglow of my husband whispering in my ear, "You're the woman."
Okay, I need that chat.
Okay, up next we have Jennifer Cavello.
They're 10 minutes off.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Jennifer Cavello, and I'm going to be reading today from my spiritual memoir called Finding God, Finding Me. And what's interesting about this book is it was written in 9 days. And you may say, how did you do that? How did you do that? Well, it was actually pretty simple. I had been told for years, you should write a book, you should write a book. Your life has got so many interesting things going on. And I thought, my life is not all that interesting. Who's going to want to read about, these different things? But people just kept saying over and over, you should write a book, you should write a book. So one day, I just kind of threw up my hands and said, Lord, if you want me to write a book, you're going to have to download it to me because I have no idea what to write about. So the very next day, I took my beautiful little purple laptop, went out onto my deck, sat down, started writing, and didn't stop for 9 days. And that's how Finding God, Finding Me came to be. So the story is the story of my life and where God was in all of the different ups and downs, and in particular, a very big down. It's a story of hope where there's hopelessness. It's a story of peace when there's no purpose, and I hope that you'll be blessed by it. Today I'm actually going to be reading from a chapter, and it is about hearing God's voice. There have been times in my life, and I'm sure yours as well, when you've wondered where God was. You wonder why He didn't save you from some misfortune or force a change in someone you loved in order for the relationship to work, or simply to avoid a physical illness. Why didn't God save me from this pain and suffering? Didn't He tell me He would always take care of me? Wasn't I His special child? Why did He leave me to suffer like this? What I have come to learn is that it isn't God's job to save us. I've had many opportunities to see God in action. The only problem is that I usually saw it afterwards. As they say, everyone has 20/20 hindsight vision. For most of my life when God showed up, with the exception of a few times, it was a whisper or a gut feeling or something so small that had I been paying attention, I would have known it was Him and possibly could have avoided many hurts and mishaps. One of the more pronounced times of my life in which God was present was in the moments before a car accident I was in with my daughter in 2008. I had just dropped off my son at his education class, and I was on my way to bring my daughter to Girl Scouts. There was a little time in between the drop-offs, and on the way home I decided to run an errand. As I approached the road that led to the store, a very small voice said, "Go home." Of course I pushed it away because clearly running this errand would be beneficial. I traveled a bit further, and again I hear the voice, this time slightly louder, "Go home." I pondered this thought for a moment, and in the seconds that followed, worked through the details of what I would have to do if I went home, and when I would be able to run this small errand. I decided to push it away again. The third time I heard the message, it was the loudest, "Go home." One would think I would put on my blinker and head home. Nope. I didn't listen. I turned right and continued on the path to complete my errand. Minutes later, crash. My car was hit and pushed over to the side of the road. I have no idea what happened. I was completely disoriented. I smelled smoke. My body ached immediately from head to toe. The airbags deployed, and I was trying to get out of the car. I turned to the back seat and I saw my daughter bundled up in her coat and strapped into her car seat. The contents of my purse were strewn all over the floor of the car, and my only goal was to get out because I thought the car was on fire. I heard the right passenger door open and a voice speaking to me, "Stay in the car." I replied, "But I smell smoke. The car is on fire. Is my daughter okay?" The voice said, "Stay in the car. There's no fire. She's fine." I stayed put. Funny how I listened to that voice. When the policeman arrived, I'm sure he spoke to me, but I have no recollection of what he said. I know that he checked on my daughter, and I do remember him asking her if anything hurt, and saying what a good girl she was for being in a car seat. As he helped me into the ambulance, I was unsteady, scared, disoriented, and crying. I called my ex-husband to come pick up my daughter as I tried to reassure her that I was okay. As the ambulance sped off towards the hospital, I was still trying to piece the last few minutes of my life back together. The paramedics were asking me questions, but all I remember is that everything hurt. and I felt nauseous. At the hospital, I remember calling a friend just to talk to someone who might be able to offer comfort. She didn't pick up. When I arrived home later that evening, full of cuts and bruises so painful I could barely walk into the door without assistance, I wondered why this happened to me. What had I done to deserve this? I had no answer. It wasn't until days, or maybe weeks later, when I remembered the voice that told me to go home. Not once, not twice, 3 times. 3 times I was told to go home. I didn't listen. Where was God? He was right there. He already saw this accident happening. He knew the person would ignore the no turn on red sign and come barreling through the red light and hit me. He warned me, just as he had on my wedding day, but I didn't listen. My errand was so much more important. I was right, he was wrong. In a few moments, my life changed. Had I listened and gone home, none of that would have happened. But I put my own selfish wants ahead of obeying God. He told me what to do, loud and clear, but I chose to do what I wanted. You might say God could have saved you. He could have had that person go a different route. You'd be right. He could have done many things, but he didn't. You see, there was a lesson for me to learn, and he needed me to learn it. I think that's how God works sometimes. I'll give you another example, one that's a little more lighthearted. I had just gotten my car detailed and was driving home. I left the windows open so the still damp interior could dry. As I pulled into my driveway and parked the car, I heard a little voice telling me to close the windows. Once again, it was repeated 3 times. And once again, I ignored it. I know, you're thinking, really, Jen? Really? Later that afternoon, as my daughter and I headed out for an activity, I opened my driver's side door to be greeted by bird poop. Yep, bird poop all down the door, inside and out. Lovely. I shake my head, laugh a little bit, look up to the heavens. He got me. While I do think God has a great sense of humor, I also believe he uses a myriad of events and challenges to teach us important lessons. These happenings are wake-up calls that he sends out in an attempt to draw us closer to him. Some require Superman-like strength and fortitude. Others, like my bird droppings lesson, are gentle reminders that had we hearkened to his voice, we could avoid the many inconveniences of life. Thank you. I'm right over there at table 25 if you have any questions.
Okay, everyone. Next we have Richard Seltzer.
Something that I wrote a few weeks ago. It's a little bit different. I was returning to a novel that was published 40 years ago, and it dawned on me that I needed to rewrite it. So I went back. It's now quite a different book, and I enjoyed writing it. So anyway, this story that I'm about to read is a story inside a story inside a story. The setting is in Manchuria during the Boxer Rebellion back in 1900. The speaker is a 17-year-old Chinese orphan who was raised by a Russian missionary. She's speaking to Bulatovich, the main character in the book, who is a Russian explorer of Ethiopia and is now a cavalry officer. Anyway, just let it flow, and we'll hope you get caught up in it. The flap of the tent opens. Dawn light shines behind her like a full-body halo. Bulatovich greets her with a question. Do you have another missionary who needs to be rescued? How can you tell? He urges. Go back to your Strakov and ask him again. I've seen the two of you together. I'd wager he'd do anything for you. We're no longer together. I left. I no longer live with him. What? Not since I told him about Madame B. Madame B? asks Blutovich. I don't know her full name. No one will say, not even the dozens of people whose lives she saved. She asked them not to say. That's one way she's coping with the shame. What shame? It's a fantastical story, but all too true. Repeatedly, I'm shocked by what people are capable of. I heard this from Zinovich, a lieutenant of railway guards. He heard it directly from people whose lives were at risk. A large group of refugees, more than 1,000, caught up with us yesterday. Railway workers, together with their wives and their women. By the wildest coincidence, Zinovich, their leader, was General Orlov's student at a military academy more than 1,000 miles from here. I told Strakov this story as soon as he arrived, just now. If I hadn't, I may never have found out. Found out what? Patience, please. It's a difficult story. Zinovich told it well. He probably wanted to put on such a performance at every station and outpost where his band of refugees stopped on the way here. I'm not a storyteller like he is. I'll tell it the way he told it from the beginning. Zinovich said, we have less than 100 railway guards providing security for nearly 1,000 railway workers and their families. When news of the Boxer Rebellion arrived, just minutes before telegraph and telephone lines were cut, we burned the warehouses where we had stored dynamite and construction material. We abandoned our houses, taking only what we could carry. The locals started looting before we left. Many of them got drunk and fought among themselves. We headed toward Hilar. We hoped that Smolyanikov and the main force of railway guards would catch up with us on the way. Some of us were panic-stricken, others, our lives upended, our future uncertain. Others rejoiced, knowing they could profit by reporting inflated losses that the authorities wouldn't be able to check. As we advanced from the greater Shingon Mountains toward Hilar, we were lucky. We didn't encounter Boxers on the way. We were joined by more Russian refugees at each station, including a group of nearly 100 who had just escaped from a harrowing situation. A renegade band of Chinese soldiers had captured them and would have killed them all if it hadn't been for Madame B. That's the name she wants to be known by. You can see her over there, standing alone in the middle of the camp, staring into the sky. She's the wife of a railway engineer. Stunning, isn't she? Exquisite. Breathtaking, agreed Wolf. Her husband must be a lucky man, added Badisco. Unfortunately, she's mad, totally mad. Has she always been that way, asked Orla? Some think the experience drove her mad. Others think she must have been crazy to have volunteered. That's what her husband says. And what did she volunteer for, asked Orla. One look at her and the Chinese commander wanted her and her alone. He knew he had the power to take her against her will. But that wasn't enough for him. He wanted her to come to him of her own free will and offer herself to him, for him to do whatever he wished with her. He announced that if she did so, he would free them all, including her. But if she didn't, he would kill them all, including her, one by one, painfully by his own hand. The hostages believed he meant what he said, but none would ask her to sacrifice herself. That would be inhuman. But her husband did. He begged her repeatedly. It wasn't for the rest of her life. Just a few moments, then it would be over, and they could go on with their lives. It was only her body the commander wanted. Her soul would be untouched. To do that for the sake of all of them would be heroic, holy. So before the first hostage was due to die, she went to the commander and kneeled before him, looking up at him with pleading eyes, hoping he would be satisfied with her willing submission and not ask for physical compliance. He laughed with joy, picked her up, and carried her into his tent. For 3 days, the hostages waited under close guard, not knowing if the commander would keep his word and free them or if he would still kill them all. Now and then, at all hours, they heard her screams. The Chinese commander delighted in hearing her scream, but he said that if she resisted him and struggled, he would go back on his word and kill her and all the rest. Finally, she stumbled out, barely able to walk. The commander kept his word. He set them all free and the Chinese vanished into the desert. Now she thinks she's pregnant. Pregnant? asked Dr. Wolf. How could she know so soon? He raped her repeatedly. It was her fertile time of month. He claimed to have fathered dozens of children by force. He delighted in doing that to such a fair-skinned European beauty. She's a martyr, a heroine, declared Orlov. But you say she's mad? Her husband says she is. She mumbles endlessly, incoherently. Of course, she's in anguish, said Orlov. She'd be mad if she weren't confused and distressed after such an experience. How can her husband forgive himself for pressuring her to do that? How can he not comfort her, help her heal? He considers her broken, damaged. He's disgusted by her. He says he'll take her to Moscow for treatment and to divorce her. As far as he's concerned, they're divorced already. Having saved all those people, surely someone must be willing to help her, said Orlov. No one wants to take the risk, to assume such a burden, to accept responsibility for a pregnant woman with a broken mind and a contaminated, perhaps diseased body. She's alone, unprotected, probably pregnant. Someone has to marry her or she'll be ruined for life. What about you, Lieutenant? asked Orlov. I'm married, Your Excellency. As am I, but there must be someone among our officers willing to rescue this brave and noble woman. When I recounted this tale to Straka, Sonia continues, he was drunk, with the drunkenness that comes from exhaustion, having ridden all night. And I hadn't told him that I thought I was pregnant. When I got to the end, I asked him if he knows anyone who might marry Madame B, despite the fact that she's pregnant. Then he admitted to me, if it weren't for you, I'd be tempted to marry her myself. But you've never met her, and she's pregnant. It's the pregnant that tempts me. I've always wanted a child. But we'll have a child. We'll have many children. No, that can't be. You doubt my womanhood, my childbearing ability? Not you, me. I don't understand. An accident during a training exercise a few years ago. But you did it. You did it repeatedly. I can perform outwardly as other men, but I'm broken. I have no seed. I will never conceive children, but I'm pregnant. Do you have any symptoms? No, not yet. It's early, but I'm sure I feel the baby growing inside me. Well, it's not mine. The doctors were clear. There's no cure for what happened to me. There hasn't been anyone else. Then you aren't pregnant. And when were you going to tell me this? Never. When Olga, my first wife, learned that she divorced me. I love you. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to lose you. Didn't you think I should know that we could never make children together? You would have married me without telling me? You weren't the man I thought you were. You didn't tell me that you want a child badly and cannot have one by nature, by coupling. You deceived me. You didn't give me a choice. You decided on your own that I would never have a child. That's the kind of man you are, but yet you want a child. That's why you're tempted by this Madame B. She will have a child, and if you married her, you could raise her child as yours. But we could adopt. Adoption is good, by love, not just by birth. You could make a child yours. We could have done that. That wouldn't be the same. If I'm to have a child, everyone must believe that child is mine, flesh of my flesh. That may make no sense to you, but it matters to me. If you had told me that, I would have understood, and I would have given you such a child. What do you mean? I would have had another man plant his seed in me, and everyone would think the seed was yours. You would have had the child you want. You would have done that for me. I would have done anything for you. You still could. But you lied to me. You never said, yes, you never said. You lied by not saying, I cannot trust you. If I cannot trust you, I cannot love you. If I cannot love you, I cannot marry you. Marry Madame B, not me. She needs marriage more than I do. What will you do? I'll go to Mazeppa. Mazeppa, you call him to Litovich. Has he? I like the way he looks at me with wanting, physical wanting, but yet respect. Maybe he will make children with me, or we will adopt children. He understands making a child yours by the love you give. He has a boy from Africa who he is raising as his own, and he understands that not being able to conceive a child doesn't make you less of a man. Is he? No, I haven't heard that of him. But I heard that Vasco, the boy from Africa, was gravely wounded in his man parts. Mazepin treated his wound and brought him back to Russia and loves him like a son and respects him as a man-to-be who may adopt and love sons and daughters of his own. Litovich stares at her, dumbfounded by such a flood of words and images. She puts her hands on his head, runs her fingers through his hair, and draws near until the tips of their noses touch. Then she tells him, say something, do something. If you want me, take me. I'm yours. Anyway, closing note. The story within the story within the story is true. Okay. It's one of the things I discovered since the book was originally written and published 4 years ago. I got the diary of this guy, Zinovich. He recounts that business about Madame B. Anyway. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next to speak is Charles Belson.
Yes,
And now for something completely different. I'm an architect, a photographer, and a writer. I've written a memoir that's recently been published, and I think that this will be a short excerpt from that memoir. I drop the 2 models off at a separate entrance. Then I meet my 4 co-workers at the check-in lounge in the charter flight terminal at the Philadelphia International Airport. All 5 of us follow the pilot to a small Piper Aztec twin-engine prop plane sitting outside on the tarmac. The 6 of us fill the plane. The airport staff places the 2 models of the concert hall I designed into the excess baggage hatch. Chartering this flight to the Rome Utica Airport in upstate New York is my idea. Although at 30, I'm the youngest member of the team, I calculate it will save time and money. In the plane, I take the seat next to the pilot. I have a direct view of the runway, as if I am the co-pilot. My boss is seated directly behind me, chatting with my 3 co-workers. He raises his voice because the acoustical insulation is doing a poor job of isolating the exterior engine noise from the 4 rear seats. As we all wait in the plane, an inch closer to takeoff, Alec leans forward and requests I ask the pilot to turn up the heat in the rear of the cabin. I watch as the pilot turns different knobs while trying to increase the heat. Then he points to the dashboard, saying, "Please open that little door and pull out the manual." He asks me to read the section and directions about turning up the heat. I glance over the rest of the manual. Most of the info in the PA Aztec plane is basic. For instance, the maximum speed is 215 miles per hour. The cruising speed is only 172 miles per hour. Some information in the manual is less straightforward. This includes the operating instructions for the Piper aircraft's proprietary radio communication system, which allows the pilot to speak with the various control towers and navigation pylons along the route of the flight plan. Excuse me. The manual recommends a practice session for the pilots not already familiar with the Piper Aztec communication system. I'm already convinced that this pilot has never flown a PA-23 Aztec. During the last 20 minutes of the 90-minute flight, the clear skies give way to thick clouds with zero visibility. The control tower issues a series of 4 technical course corrections. The pilot executes all 4 directives over the course of the next 10 minutes by pressing buttons, turning knobs, and throttling down. But after the last command, the pilot loses two-way radio contact. Our Piper Aztec, now cloud-bound, blind, deaf, and mute, begins its descent. In response, I quickly revisit the chapter in the manual regarding the two-way radio communication systems. As a result, I ask the pilot a not very technical question. Shouldn't the radio control knob be turned to the right and not to the left? He tries turning the knob to the right. It works. Two-way communication is restored. At the same moment, the Aztec drops below the prevailing cloud cover. The pilot clearly sees the runway in the distance. He and I also see another plane heading dangerously close to us. At the same time, the control tower says with urgency, "Piper Aztec, you are cleared for emergency landing." Simultaneously, the nearby plane pulls up and away. As the Aztec taxis to the gate, I hear the pilot explain to the control tower that there was a temporary malfunction with the proprietary two-way radio communication system. The van from Hamilton College picks us up and drives us back to the college. We have a full day of meetings with the faculty, the administration, and the trustees regarding the final plans for the new music facilities at the college. By the end of the day, the design of the Welland Concert Hall is approved by the college. The Hamilton College van drives the five of us back to the airport. The pilot cleaned out the cabin and bought all of us snacks and bottled water. I take my co-pilot seat. My co-workers pull down the window shades and close the curtains that separate them from the cockpit. They drift in and out of sleep because of the engine noise and the poor acoustical isolation. They cannot hear my conversations with the pilot. As we head due south to Philadelphia, the pilot becomes my tour guide, pointing out the night lights of towns and cities below. The pilot also knows the locations of his favorite constellations, as well as the stories and legends behind them. He seems to enjoy being on autopilot after a very rough day. I also start to relax. When the pilot does the talking, I do the listening. I am reminded of childhood memories of the enormous semi-spherical projection screen in the Hayden Planetarium at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. I remember the narrator standing in the middle of a vast space under the interior black sky, enthusiastically telling us his carefully rehearsed star-crossed story about Venus and Mars. The flashing lights of the planes flying above and below in the night sky prompt me to question the pilot. He explains that the flashing lights are called strobes. They are an anti-collision device that is turned on at takeoff and turned off promptly upon landing. The pilot explains that he will stay at the present cruising altitude as he heads south until he lands in Philadelphia. Then he raises his arm to the right and points upward. Look up there at 2 o'clock. See that plane in the distance, heading east with the flashing lights? It's separated from us vertically by 2,000 feet. Our paths will cross safely in a minute or so. As I stare out the window and look at the tip of our Piper Aztec wing, and I don't see any flashing lights, I think of a question to ask the pilot that is equal parts fear and safety. Is the reason I don't see any flashing lights on our wing tip because the strobe light is under the wing where I can't see it flashing? Holy shit, flashing lights, the pilot responds. Immediately after the pilot presses the on button, the cockpit starts to pulsate with flashing lights emanating from anti-collision strobe devices on the tips of the wings. For one excruciatingly fearful moment, it feels like I'm trapped inside a flying disco sitting next to an obliviously stoned DJ masquerading as a pilot. I don't tell Alec or my coworkers about the flashing lights because these are the kind of details that are best to keep to yourself.
Wow. Those were the days.
Okay, next up we have Mr. Mark Perlman.
Thank you. I grew up in the Bronx, I don't need a mic. Why do you need a mic? I mean, you know, it's a small group. I'm not a professional author, but I had a book inside me, and like a few people, it came out after about 20 years. It's a historical fiction. The book chronicles the life of a fictional African-American character and his trials and tribulations of his complicated life through some of the seminal events and very interesting people of the early 20th century. My book comes in two flavors, vanilla and French vanilla, since most of the book takes place in France. So I'm not going to read an excerpt of my book. I'm just going to give you a short synopsis and show you some pictures, okay? Show and tell. All right, here goes. Go back to the halcyon days in Paris between the world wars, when hot jazz and the bohemian life drives the cultural changes due to the catastrophe of World War I. Virgil Carpenter, the central character, grows up in America during the Jim Crow era of the early 20th century. The book chronicles the combat experience and political dynamics of the famous Harlem Hellfighter Regiment in France when Virgil joins this unit after America enters the war. Due to unforeseen circumstances, Virgil must leave America soon after he returns home and journeys back to Paris to start a new life. He starts a new life and family while working for a Paris police detective, once his French liaison officer. During the 1920s, Virgil and his mentor worked to solve 3 serial murder cases. He meets artistic and literary luminaries like, and here's my show and tell. The first one is the lady driving the car. Her name is Madam C.J. Walker. Long story short, she's the precursor of Avon. She grows up poor and uneducated, but through her persistence, she learns chemistry, makes beauty products for the African-American female market, and in a few years becomes the first self-made millionaires in America. She makes the equivalent of about $17 million a year in today's dollars. Not bad. The second luminary in the book is James Reese Europe. He is the most famous composer and conductor of ragtime and jazz music in America. He's the president of the Clef Club. They play to mixed-race audiences in Harlem. And when war breaks out, he's one of the first recruits. And through his band of the Harlem Hellfighters, they introduced jazz to the French nation, which is a big component to their culture today. Jazz and Jerry Lewis. I don't know why Jerry Lewis, but jazz became before Jerry Lewis. I just want to let you know that, okay? So the unit he joins, as I mentioned, is the famous Harlem Hellfighter Regiment. They did not fight alongside their white comrades in arms. They fought and were amalgamated with the French army. And there they racked up their combat experience. They never had a prisoner taken in the 191 days they were at the front.
And they were the first American unit to cross the Rhine River after the armistice, the most decorated American unit in the French army. Our main character, Virgil, making his new life in Paris, goes into this bookstore, famously known as Shakespeare and Company. Shakespeare and Company still exists today on the left bank of Paris, across from Notre Dame Cathedral. It is founded by a New Jerseyite by the name of Sylvia Beach. She opens up this English-speaking bookstore, which becomes a haven for English literary types. To name a few, one is James Joyce, who writes this controversial book titled Ulysses. It cannot get published, and Sylvia steps in and publishes the book Ulysses. Another person who's a mainstay at the bookstore and the most controversial person there is the young Ernest Hemingway. And all these literary types congregate around the bookstore, and Virgil is befriended by all of them. Another individual that crosses Virgil's path is a Renaissance man by the name of Eugene Bullard. Eugene is a prize fighter before the war, and when the war breaks out, he joins the French Air Force as the only African-American fighter pilot in the French Air Force. After the war, as a musician, a drum player, he becomes the business agent for the newly arrived African-American jazz players in Paris. And they played jazz to the Parisians. He opens up his own jazz club, and when war breaks out in 1940, World War II, he goes back to America and becomes a very famous civil rights activist of his own right. He dies in the early 1960s as an elevator operator in Rockefeller Center. Unfortunate. And the last luminary I'll talk about is none other than the famous Josephine Baker. She grows up in the streets of St. Louis making money by dancing for her younger sisters to make money at the age of 12. By the time she's 13, she's married for the first time. She's married twice by the time she's 16, and divorced twice. She joins a dance troupe. They make their way over to New York, and then eventually to Paris, where she becomes a jazz dancing and singing phenomenon.